What if the person who saved your family wasn't supposed to be part of it? He built an empire from nothing, signed billion-dollar deals before breakfast. But nothing, not success, not money, not even love once lost, had prepared Robson Bernabeu for two 4-year-old boys who hadn't slept in months. And tonight, once again, he stood in the dim hallway of his Beverly Hills mansion, listening to the sound that had haunted him since the accident. His sons crying out for a mother who would never return. 3 nannies had come and gone, all defeated. Therapists, sleep consultants, even hypnotherapists. Nothing worked. The twins were trapped in grief. And their father, he was drowning in guilt, sleepless, joyless, and on the verge of breaking. Until a stranger walked in. Not from Harvard, not with a perfect resume. Just a young woman from Bakersfield with kind eyes, and a secret of her own. What she did in 24 hours changed everything. But no one, not even Robson, was ready for what came next. Because love doesn't knock, it breaks down the door when you least expect it. I can't do this anymore, Mr. Bernabeu. Marisol's voice trembled as she zipped her suitcase. Her resignation letter already signed. They scream all night. They won't eat. They won't listen. They need help I can't give them. Robson rubbed his temples with fingers that had once crushed deals in steel boardrooms but now shook from exhaustion. Above them, the twins' cries pierced the marble walls like needles. Please, just one more week, he begged, voice hoarse from too many sleepless nights. I'll double your pay. It's not about the money, sir. Her eyes softened with pity. It's stability. They need a mother. A silence fell, the kind that hurts to sit in. Robson didn't reply. He didn't have to. They both knew she was right. But how do you replace a mother? How do you repair something that broke so quietly you didn't even hear it shatter? Right finger if you've ever watched someone fall apart while trying to hold everyone else together, stay with us. This story will move you. Comment below, have you ever seen someone heal a broken home, without even realizing they were the missing piece? The evening air in Robson Bernabeu's Beverly Hills estate was thick with a silence that felt heavier than gold. From the marble foyer to the grand piano in the living room. Every surface gleamed, yet none reflected the emptiness he carried inside. His empire spanned continents, yet tonight, in the dim glow of a single chandelier, he felt poorer than ever. Upstairs, in a nursery painted in soft pastels, 2 small bodies wreathed in agony. 4-year-old Victor and Vinicius howled without pause. Their tears a drumbeat of loss. Their mother, gone 6 months ago in a car crash, had left behind more than a photograph on the mantel. She left 2 shattered hearts and a father unprepared for either the lullaby or the lull. Robson pressed his forehead to cold glass. He had traded his nights for boardroom conquests. But those victories now tasted like ash. He remembered the last time he held his wife, her whisper, "I love you," drowned out by his ringing phone. He'd chosen a conference call over a goodbye. And that moment, he realized, had fractured everything. He slipped off his Italian loafers, his cufflinks clinking softly on the hardwood, and climbed the stairs in silence. Each step echoed the betrayal he felt toward his sons, and toward himself. How could he teach these boys to trust the world when he'd once trusted it more than his own marriage? In the nursery, he crouched beside 2 tear-streaked faces. Victor's small hand reached for him, clutching at the lapel of his bespoke suit. "Daddy," he sobbed, "I want mommy." Vinicius pressed a teddy bear to his chest. Its one missing button eye an echo of their loss. Robson closed his eyes against the sting of their pain. He had all the power a man could buy, yet against grief, he was powerless. He tried what he thought he should. Soft words. Gentle songs. He read a story about a brave rabbit. His voice stiff with unfamiliar tenderness. He sang lullabies in a baritone crafted for commands, not comfort. When that failed, he lay between them, arms outstretched, hoping his presence would fill the void. But midnight slipped into the small hours, and still their eyes were wide with hunger, not for sleep, but for the mother they remembered. When they finally surrendered to exhaustion, Robson retreated down the stairs, his shoulders bowed under a weight he hadn't known existed. In his study, he turned his late wife's framed photograph face down. Her smile, once his anchor, felt now like an accusation. Guilt and grief warred inside him. How many more nights would he lose before finding a way back to his sons? He sank into his leather chair, the city's distant lights mocking his solitude. He was a titan of real estate. Yet he could not build a home. He had shattered the very foundation he'd promised to protect. The clock ticked past 3 a.m., and in that moment of utter defeat, Robson made a silent vow: he would find someone, anyone, who could mend what he'd broken. Dawn broke over the manicured lawns of the Bernabeu estate, filtering through towering palms that cast long, swaying shadows across the driveway. Inside the grand foyer, Robson Bernabeu's gaze lingered on the front door as footsteps approached, hesitant, light. He braced himself for the familiar scamper of another nanny's heels. Another resignation letter. Instead, a single knock arrived, soft but certain. He opened the door to find Elena's niece standing in the threshold, jeans dusty from travel. A simple white blouse buttoned to the collar, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. No high heels, no designer handbag, just a woman in worn sneakers. Shoulders squared, eyes the color of sunlit amber. "Mr. Bernabeu," she said, voice calm but carrying its own quiet authority. "I'm Jessica Ramirez." In that moment, the polished marble and gilt frames receded. All Robson saw was a stranger, one he had every reason to distrust. This woman had no pedigree, no glossy references, no pedigree stamped on company letterhead. And yet, she stood before him more unflinching than any of the 3 elite nannies who had quit, pleading for their release. "Please come in," he managed, heart thrumming with unexpected curiosity. "I've heard you've worked with children before." She nodded once. "Preschool in Bakersfield. I left for reasons that aren't in any file." She met his raised eyebrow with a faint, defiant smile. As they climbed the staircase, Robson's mind raced. He'd assess her credentials, test her methods, and, if necessary, pay her to walk out. But before he could form a plan, the first shrill cries of the twins tore through the walls. The nursery door swung open before he could knock. Inside, the room looked as if a hurricane had passed, toys scattered, blankets tangled, 2 small figures rocking with unbridled anguish. The boy's cheeks were streaked with tears, Victor's lip quivered. Vinicius clutched his bear so tightly its stuffing peeked through a seam. Marisol had called it battlefield. How would this woman fare? Jessica did not hesitate. She moved forward and, most astonishing, sat cross-legged on the pastel rug, closing the distance instead of maintaining professional space. Robson blinked. None of the others had dared. CEOs were meant to stand tall. Nannies were meant to hover at the edges. But here was someone who joined the fray. "Hi," she said softly, as though greeting old friends. "My name is Jessica. I love trains. Do you two have a favorite train?" The boys paused mid-cry. Blinking at her, Victor sniffled, pointed to a corner where a wooden locomotive lay half-buried beneath blocks. "Big train," he managed. "Really?" Jessica's face lit with genuine excitement. "Show me how it works." In the next heartbeat, Victor crawled forward and lifted the engine onto the track. Vinicius followed. Robson watched, stupefied, as the twins, who had screamed for months, began describing each car. The color of the caboose. How they once took their mother to see a real steam engine at a fair. Jessica listened as if they were the only people who mattered. She asked questions, a steady stream of warm, curious questions. No quick fixes, no gimmicks, just sincere interest. Robson felt a knot in his chest loosen, a fleeting echo of hope. But he scolded himself, "Don't get attached." He was rich, not naive. People came and went. Attachments led to pain. Yet, watching Jessica lean in, sharing laughter with his sons for the first time in half a year, he realized he had forgotten what laughter sounded like. When the session ended, 20 minutes later, the boys followed her like ducklings. Even Victor, the more reserved twin, clung to her words. Jessica rose, gathered the scattered toys, and smiled at Robson in a way that made him catch his breath. "This office?" she asked. "Where should I hang my coat?" He waved toward a corner of the nursery. "Anywhere you like." As Robson turned to close the door behind her, he heard her whisper over her shoulder, "Thank you for giving me a chance." He paused. Chance? Was he not giving them both a chance? A chance to heal, or to break his heart again? He let the door click softly, the echo hanging like a promise. Alone in the hallway, Robson realized that for the first time in months, his night would not be spent drowning in silence or guilt. It would be spent watching from the doorway, observing as someone untested, spoke the language his sons had forgotten. And in that moment of fragile peace, he sensed the first stirrings of something he had believed lost forever, hope. Robson woke before sunrise, the first time in months he'd seen morning light without the sting of panic. Usually, he'd been at his desk by 6, scanning stock reports, sealing cross-continental deals. Today, though, his mind was on a different forecast: 2 sleepy boys and the woman who'd given him back their laughter. He found Victor and Vinicius already awake, dragging their blankets into the living room as if summoning company. Robson straightened his tie in the hallway mirror but caught his reflection, a man whose jaw was set by business. Not bedtime stories. He hesitated, then loosened his collar. Today, the boardroom could wait. Jessica awaited them by the fireplace, 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate in hand. She wore a simple cardigan, the same warm smile that first disarmed the twins. Victor bounded forward, nearly toppling his father. "Daddy, look," he cried, unveiling a crude but colorful rock painted like a jaguar. Jessica winked. "I thought you two might want to paint with someone else's paws today." Then, turning to Robson, she added quietly, "Care to join?" He swallowed, bitterness brushing his tongue. He had no artistic bone in his body. But when Vinicius clutched his hand and guided him to the low table, Robson felt an unfamiliar flutter, a mix of fear and longing. He dipped the brush in green paint and fumbled across the rough stone. At first, his strokes were hesitant, businesslike, straight, precise, but under Jessica's gentle guidance, he began to curve his lines, adding whiskers, fangs, a tail that swept across the canvas. Victor gasped. "Daddy, it's scary, terrifying," Robson admitted, grinning as the boys shrieked in delight. For the first time, work metrics, profit margins, stock tickers, faded. He was measured by laughter, not leverage. When the painted jaguar stood upright, Robson felt a fierce pride. He had created something alive, unpredictable, joyful. Later that afternoon, Robson found himself pacing his office while his sons napped. He should have reviewed financial spreadsheets, but he stared at a framed snapshot of the jaguar rock. In the crystal reflection, he saw not a tycoon, but a father reborn. Then came the call he dreaded, a high-stakes merger falling through. His CFO barked. "This could cost us billions." Old Robson would have snapped back orders, drowned the failure in aggressive strategy. Instead, Robson leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and allowed himself a single sigh, one for loss, one for hope. He whispered, "Handle it, Greg," and with that, he turned off his phone. That night, he clipped the boys' tiny pajamas to a hanger, striped like a train, their favorite, and slid under the covers between them. He played the jaguar role he'd painted that morning, whispering, "Roar, I'm the guardian of the night." The twins giggled, clinging to his arms as though each roar would chase away the shadows forever. In that moment, Robson realized healing wasn't a boardroom tactic. It was a choice: to put down the briefcase, to embrace imperfection, to risk vulnerability. He was no longer the man who crushed deals. He was a father who embraced bedtime. The sun had barely kissed the horizon when Robson arrived in the kitchen, intent on surprising Jessica with fresh coffee. Instead, he found her standing by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the rose garden she'd revived. The warm glow of morning did nothing to thaw the tension in her posture. "Good morning," he ventured softly. She turned, eyes haunted. "Morning." Before he could ask, the front door chimed. Gregorio announced a visitor. "Mr. Raul Esparza to see you, miss." Silence fell like lead. Raul, her past fiancé, stepped through the doorway. Tall, earnest, with that old confidence in his gaze. Jessica's breath hitched, her jaw clenched. Robson's heart thundered in his chest. He'd known her world was complicated, but never expected its ghosts to cross his threshold. "Jessica," Raul began, voice low, "my father is dying. I need you back in Oaxaca." His plea carried the weight of tradition, of debts she'd once vowed to honor. Jessica's lips trembled. I can't." Raul, her gaze shot to Robson, shame and fear warring in her eyes. "I'm committed here, to the boys, to him." She nodded toward Robson, whose breath caught at the realization that him included a man entirely outside her expectations. Raoul's eyes flickered with hurt, and something darker. "A Wall Street billionaire's nanny," he spat. "Was I just a placeholder until someone better came along?" Robson's blood boiled. Old instincts roared. Defend. Dominate. Control. He stepped forward, fists clenched. "You have no right to speak to her that way." Yet even as the words left his mouth, He felt their inadequacy. No amount of wealth could rewrite her history, or erase the loyalty she felt to a man she'd once loved. Jessica's voice broke the tension. Stop it, she turned back to Raoul, tears glinting. I loved you, but I needed to live my own life. Then, to Robson, I'm sorry you had to see this. Robson's chest tightened. Betrayal stung, yet it was not hers to bear. He recalled late nights pacing the nursery, wrestling guilt that was not entirely his own. Now, a different pain, fear of losing her before he'd fully claimed his chance at happiness. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I trust you, and I choose you, no matter what's come before. His words trembled with truth he'd never spoken. The room held its breath. Raoul's jaw clenched, his shoulders slumped. Without another word, he slipped away, leaving the door ajar like an open wound. Jessica closed it quietly, leaning against the wood. Robson placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She looked up, vulnerability and gratitude colliding in her gaze. Thank you for understanding, she whispered. He swallowed the lump in his throat, steadying himself. Just promise me one thing, whatever your past. We have a line we won't cross. His thumb brushed her hand. This family, our family, comes first. Jessica nodded, tears slipping free. In that fragile moment, they sealed an unspoken pact. Love would demand honesty, but courage would hold them through the storm. Morning arrived heavy with anticipation, too heavy. Jessica's absence hung over the mansion like a gathering storm. Robson moved through silent halls, past toy trains parked in mid-track, past empty chairs where laughter once rang. His heart pounded, without her steady presence. The fragile piece she'd built was already splintering. At breakfast, the twins poked cold cereal and exchanged worried glances. Victor's usual spark was dim. Vinicius' lip trembled with every spoonful. When Robson knelt beside them, Victor whispered, "Where's Jessica?" The question stabbed at him. He'd been so proud of his resolve, of proving he could handle both boardrooms and bedtime, that he'd forgotten his sons needed her as much as he did. By midday, the crisis struck. Vinicius, chasing Victor through the sun-drenched garden, tripped on a stone, and his small body collided with the marble fountain's edge. Robson's world split. He scooped Vinicius into his arms, eyes wide, blood blooming at the temple. Panic ignited in his chest as Victor's cries joined his brother's. Call an ambulance. Robson barked to Gregorio, voice brittle. He knelt, pressing cloth to the wound, every second stretching into eternity. Images of past failures, missed mothers' birthdays, missed dates with wife, swirled in his mind, each one a cruel reminder of losses he'd never let himself mourn. Now, as his son's life trembled in his grip, grief collided with terror and fierce determination. At the Robson's tailored suit was soaked with sweat, his knuckles white around the hospital bracelet. Hours passed in a blur of monitors and murmured assurances from doctors. When at last a nurse emerged, Robson's knees buckled. He's stable, she said softly, just needs a few stitches. Relief was a tidal wave that nearly drowned him. In that moment of raw vulnerability, he realized he had been trying to protect his sons from pain, but in truth, he needed protection too, and Jessica was the shield he'd been missing. As he returned home, the drive felt endless. He rehearsed the words he needed to say, the truth of his fear, the depth of his need, the promise he failed to keep by letting her leave. When he reached the front steps, there she stood, Jessica, arriving breathless, eyes filled with worry and resolve. He opened his arms without thought, voice trembling, I was so afraid. I need you here, we need you. She stepped into the embrace, and in that collision of relief and love, their bond deepened beyond any vow. The Pacific dawn painted the Malibu shore in rose and gold, as if the sky itself celebrated. Soft waves whispered against the sand, carrying away old regrets and stirring fresh hope. Robson stood barefoot at the water's edge, heart hammering like the tide. The white linen suit he'd chosen now feeling impossibly light, like stepping into a new life. Beside him, Victor and Vinicius grasped tiny pillows embroidered with their initials, faces alight with mischief and pride. Lucia, just 3 months old, nestled in Jessica's arms under a canopy of driftwood and wildflowers her grandmother might have braided. In that fragile cradle, she represented the miracle born of 2 hearts once shattered. Robson watched Jessica approach across the sand, her gown a swirl of lace and breeze, every step revealing the woman who had healed him and his sons. He remembered the first morning she'd held a paintbrush in his hand, The first night she'd calmed their tears with a story. The first time he'd realized love demanded vulnerability, not victory. As she drew near, Robson's chest tightened. He had built skyscrapers, now he built a promise. He took her hands, soft, yet resolute, and spoke words that trembled with the weight of their journey. Jessica Ramirez, he began, voice low like a vow to the sea. You taught me that home is not a place, but a promise kept. You showed these boys, and me, how to trust again. Today, I ask you to be my wife, to stand by my side as we face tomorrow's storms, and its sunshine. A hush fell. Jessica's amber eyes shone with tears that glistened like morning dew. She recalled the nights she'd wondered if love could survive her past. Her doubts, the distance between their worlds. Yet here, on this shore, she saw a future forged not by birthright or bloodline, but by shared courage. Yes, she whispered, voice steady with conviction. I choose you, Robson. Every sunrise and every challenge, together. When their lips met, the ocean exhaled in a gentle roar. The twins erupted in joyous cheers, scattering seashells in celebration. Lucia cooed, a soft symphony of new life. As the ceremony closed, Robson looked at his family, 2 sons, 1 daughter, and the woman who had become their heart. In that moment, he understood that true wealth lay not in opulent mansions, but in hands held through fear and hope. They walked back up the sand, footprints side by side, a trail woven by forgiveness and faith. The sun climbed steadily, promising that whatever storms might come, they would face them as one.